Jean-Paul Sartre said, "Man is nothing but what he makes himself." Sartre was a large contributor to the framework of existential theory, and the first to suggest that existence precedes essence, which basically means that humans aren't born with some predetermined purpose. It's our jobs to figure out that purpose ourselves. In both Hamlet by William Shakespeare and Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, these ideas are explored. Hamlet is about a young prince who decides to act a little crazy in order to find out who killed his father and avenge him. Though he succeeds, he dies shortly after, and in his last moments requests for his story to be told. Author Ted Chiang also tackles the idea of purpose in his novella Story of Your Life. Story of Your Life follows linguist Louise Banks as she's recruited to communicate with these aliens called heptapods who've recently arrived on Earth. She learns that the heptapods experience time non-linearly in what Chiang refers to as simultaneous consciousness, and while growing to understand their language, she begins to see time the same way as them, leading her to learn about the death of a daughter she's yet to have. Though I just explained this story chronologically in order for our measly little sequential consciousnesses to understand it, Chiang tells this story non-linearly, mixing language tenses entirely in sentences like, "I remember what it'll be like watching you when you are a day old." Through these two texts' analysis of time and freedom, they ultimately express that acting is synonymous with being. Because of her knowledge of the future, Louise no longer has free will. This isn't some Greek prophecy where her loose knowledge of what will happen tricks her into following a certain path. It's detailed, it's inescapable. Louise often explains this in a surprisingly positive nature, saying it was like a sense of urgency, a sense of obligation to act precisely as she knew she would. And it's because of Louise's lack of freedom that she's able to act. Hamlet, on the other hand, struggles to act because of his immense freedom. He gets so overwhelmed by choices and unknowns that he doesn't take any action at all. He postpones acting with the hope of a more clear path in his future, often making claims like, "I'll have grounds more relative than this." And this illustrates Sartre's idea of this terrifying abundance of freedom. Sartre believed that free will was a huge responsibility because it meant we had to make our own decisions. We couldn't rely on some figure like a teacher or a god. He often used the example of a man with a problem, unable to choose the right answer. According to Sartre, there is no right answer until the man chooses one for himself. When Louise is coming to terms with her simultaneous consciousness, she asks the heptapods that if they already know what will happen, why do they continue to, do anything? In response, they say they act to create the future. Here Louise explains performative language, like, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Everyone at a wedding anticipates these words, but the ceremony doesn't count until they're said. With performative language, saying equaled doing. For the heptapods, all language was performative. Instead of using language to inform, they used language to actualize. Louise explains that the sensation of conversing when you knew what would be said was like performing a play. This is where the lines blur between act as in to take action and act as in to perform. Because Louise knows her future, she knows the script that she has to perform. And although he may not know it, Hamlet has a script too. Louise puts this into words after having a conversation with her coworker, stating that he was perfectly oblivious of the script, yet his responses matched his assigned lines exactly. This introduces Hamlet's struggle with the theatricality of the mind, and the line between Hamlet the person and Hamlet the play becomes less clear. When Hamlet watches a player perform in Act 2, he asks, "What's Hecuba to him, or he to her, that he should weep for her?" saying that if performed feelings can be so convincing, where's the line between performance and reality? Okay, it's getting meta. This can lead us to believe that Hamlet the person becomes Hamlet the play, somewhere along the way. In fact, towards the end of Hamlet, he asks Horatio to tell his story. In doing so, Hamlet becomes a story, and Hamlet becomes the story of his life. Sound familiar? Hamlet continues to exist both within the confines of the text and outside of them. Hamlet, italicized, allows for Hamlet to exist long after he dies. Every time someone reads Hamlet's lines, along with every new film adaptation or live performance, Hamlet lives, and he continues to be.
To be. To be. To be. To be. to be.
Story of Your Life is framed around one question. In a moment that appears at the beginning of the novella and at the very end, Louise's husband asks her, "Do you want to make a baby?" And the story ends and begins again as she says yes. Although Louise knows that if she agrees she will experience the loss of a child, she decides to participate, to act, to be. Similarly, Hamlet chooses to participate in a battle and finally kill the king, and although it results in tragedy, it also begins his story. As existentialism suggests, there is a certain incompleteness of the individual man till that last moment of death when, after so many exercises of his terrifying liberty, he is exactly, for better or worse, what he made himself. So, outside of this external view of things, how does this relate to our lives? What I think we can take away from these texts is the importance of living deliberately. Theist existentialism suggests that even if there is a God, she is not responsible for giving our life purpose, so we have to take action ourselves in order for our lives to be meaningful. Even when we don't know the future like Louise does, Hamlet teaches us that the readiness is all. Louise's knowledge of the future doesn't change what happens to her, it simply changes her understanding of it all. It simply allows her the readiness for what is to come. Ultimately, both Louise and Hamlet decide to be being in and of itself an action. If there's anything these texts convey, it's that when presented with the choice, we must actively choose to be.